Today's story is the spiffiest giant in town. George was a giant, and he was the scruffiest, which means dirty, giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown pants, sandals, and the same old patched up gown. "I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town," he said sadly. So he had some old and dirty clothes, and he didn't want to be that way. But one day, George noticed a new shop. It was full of spiffy clothes, so he bought himself a spiffy shirt, a spiffy pair of pants, a spiffy belt, a spiffy striped tie, some spiffy socks with diamonds on the sides, and a pair of spiffy, shiny shoes. "Well, now that I'm the spiffiest giant," he said in town. He was so excited with all these new clothes. So George left his old clothes behind in the shop, and he was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the sidewalk stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so long and so very cold. I wish I had a long, warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his striped scarf or striped tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, as he wrapped it around and around the giraffe's neck. It made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. So he gave him his tie and he wrapped it all around. As George strode towards home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." So he was still feeling good about his new clothes. George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was making loud noises. "What's the matter?" asked George. "Well, that's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in the storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." So now he doesn't have a sail. What do you think George is going to do? "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, as he tied it into the mast of the goat's boat. "It made a magnificent sail." "Thank you," said the goat. So he used his shirt and made it into a sail. George strutted on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look at me, up and down, I am still the spiffiest giant in town." So now he gave his shirt away, gave his tie away. George came to a tiny, ruined house. Beside the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down, and now we don't have anywhere to live. I wish I had a nice new house." So now they don't have a place to live. "Cheer up," said George. He took off his shiny shoes. It was giving him blisters anyway. And as the mouse and her baby scrambled inside the shoe, it made the perfect house for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. Look at all of them living in the shoe now. They're going to use that as their new house. George had to hop along the road now because he only had one shoe. And he didn't mind because he hopped and he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. But look me up and down, I am the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a campsite, and beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sleeping bag," said the fox. "I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had somewhere warm and dry to sleep." So now he didn't have a sleeping bag, the fox. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his socks with diamonds on the sides. "He was tickling my toes anyway," he said, As the fox snuggled into it, it made a very fine sleeping bag. So that fox fit right into that sock to be a new dry sleeping bag. But now George was still hopping along because he doesn't have a shoe and now he doesn't have a sock. And he kept singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. But look at me, up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a big, squishy bag. Beside the bag stood a dog, and he was howling. "Well, what's the matter?" he asked the dog. "It's this bog," said the dog. "I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path." So he can't figure out how to get across. He keeps getting stuck in the mud. "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his spiffy new belt. It was squeezing my tummy anyway, and he laid it down as a bog so that he could get across. It made an excellent path. "Thank you," said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. But," what do you think he's going to say? "My pants are falling down, and I'm the coldest giant in town." Suddenly, George felt sad and shivery, and he didn't feel so spiffy anymore. So he stood on one foot and thought, "I have to go back to the shop where I left some more of my clothes." So he turned around and he hopped all the way back to the shop, trying to keep his pants up. But when he got to the shop, it was closed. "Oh no," cried George. He sank down onto the sidewalk and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all those animals had that he met along the way on his way home. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out of the top. George took a closer look. "It's my gown," he yelled, "my dear old gown and sandals." George put them on. They felt wonderfully comfortable. And in the coziest, "Here I am, I'm now the coziest giant in town," and he danced back along the road. So he put all of his dirty clothes back on, but they were super comfortable because that's what he knows, right? But outside the front door stood all the animals that had helped. They were carrying an enormous, which means big, present. "Come on, George," they said, "open it." George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and a card. "Look inside the card, George," said the animals. George put the crown on his head and he opened it, and it read, "You gave your scarf to a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and the gown for the kindest giant in town." Wasn't he kind? He gave all his new clothes to all these animals to help them. And he did it without even hesitating. And that's very important. And that's what it means to be kind. He was definitely a kind friend. So go out and be kind today. Love you.